Reaganomics, trickle-down theory, was it right? Tax cuts for the rich, union busting. It worked for the top 1% and the rich people. Did it work for the lower wage people, the middle class? Is it just to have a few billionaires running around with all the money? Is it just for healthcare companies to earn billions and billions in profit while people are suffering and not having the care they need while they pay out money to their shareholders? Is this just might makes right? Is that justice? Is this the way the world works? As I'm leaving Athens, I have all these questions in my mind. What is justice? What's the right way to live? What's the best way to have a society? What's the best way to educate ourselves as citizens and as good people? How can I live a just life? And how can I live in a just society? So I was just getting ready today, listening to one of the yoga videos that I was going to post in the description, and they put up a picture of the tree, the 8-limbed yoga tree, which has all the 8 limbs of yoga, the 8 steps of yoga. And I realized that the tree of yoga is just like Plato's cave. It's a system of hierarchy of steps that you can take. And the interesting thing is that the first steps in the 8 limbs of yoga all have to do with ethical actions. What is just, what is right conduct, what is right thinking, and getting lying and bad views out of your mind. And it's just the same thing in Plato. So that's really interesting. It's an interesting connection. What is the best way that a human can lead a flourishing and happy life? So basically the question then becomes, well, what's best for a human? To live justly, with justice, or injustice? Especially if that means justice means not getting all of the material comforts like things, possessions, money, power, lots of pleasures, tasty dishes, think living in luxury, having your yachts and your vacation homes and all that. Is it better to be just and deprive yourselves of that? Or is it better to be an unjust and not a good person and to get all those material possessions? And in order to investigate that, they build a pretend city, because they say, well, if you just look at one individual, it's hard to answer that question. So let's build this city and let's look at injustice and justice in our city, and let's see where the city is flourishing and where it's not flourishing. Plato's not building a model of what he thinks is a perfect country, a model for a perfect country. He's building a model to analyze justice and injustice. So there's unjust things that he puts into the model. So the model is filled with justice and injustice, specifically just at the beginning when it's a simple state, and injustice when the state becomes greedy and luxurious. So now we're going to get into the myth of, or the allegory of the cave. And the setup for it, and I'll read a little of that though, but the setup for it basically, in this city that is constructed as a model to analyze justice and injustice, in the city there are these guardians, which are allegory to or represent the actors, the acts. You can think of like the police force, the FBI. They're the actors of the state that keep the state in check. So as it maps to the individual psyche or the individual soul, the guardians may be like the conscience, the sense of shame, the thinking, discerning about what is right, what is wrong. So it's the powerful part, and it's also a powerful part that has wisdom. So they need to be powerful. So your urges need to be powerful and strong, but they also need to be wise and just and good. And so the question is, well, these guardians, in this model, they have to be good. So they have to understand the principle of the good. The question is, well, what is the good? And Socrates says, well, that's basically like saying, what is ultimate reality? What is God? What is the key to everything in the world? And he says, I'm not up to that task. I can't tell you. I don't know. And even if I did know, I couldn't explain it to you in words. And so he says, what I can do is I can tell you a little bit of a nugget kind of along the side that's kind of like what it is, but I can't tell you what it is, and that's good enough. And so then he says, okay, well, if I can tell you what the good is like, then I'm going to tell you this allegory. So here's the allegory of the cave. Okay, so the allegory of the cave is comparing the sun to its light as the good to divine luminosity, the brilliant light of being. So he's talking about the guardians of the state, which is analogous to in your psyche, in your soul, in yourself, the power of action, the strong principle, the doing principle in yourselves. Can the doing principle or the guardians be in the darkness of ignorance of what is good, of the good, the principle of the good? And he says, I suspect that no one who is ignorant of the good will have a true knowledge of beauty and justice. That, he said, is a shrewd suspicion of yours. And if we only have a guardian who has this knowledge, our state will be perfectly ordered? Of course, he replied, but I wish that you would tell me whether you conceive this supreme principle of the good to be knowledge or pleasure or different from either. Yes, I said, I knew all along that a fastidious gentleman like you would not be contented with the thoughts of other people about these matters. True, Socrates, but I must say that one who, like you, has passed a lifetime in the study of philosophy should not be always repeating the opinions of others and never telling his own. Well, but has anyone a right to say positively what they do not know? Not, he said, with the assurance of positive certainty. A person has no right to do that, but a person may say what they think as a matter of opinion. And do you not know, I said, that all mere opinions are bad and the best of them blind? Would you not deny that those who have any true notion without intelligence are only like blind people who feel their way along the road? Very true. So twice we've been in the cave already, the darkness of ignorance and blind men who feel their way along. Very true. And do you wish to behold what is blind and crooked and base, when others will tell you of brightness and beauty? Still, I must implore you, Socrates, said Glaucon, not to turn away just as you are reaching the goal. If you will only give such an explanation of the good as you have already given of justice and temperance and other virtues, we shall be satisfied. Yes, so they're saying, please tell us what the good is, and Socrates is saying, I don't know what the good is. I can't explain it. Yes, my friend, and I shall be at least equally satisfied, but I cannot help fearing that I shall fail, and that my indiscreet zeal will bring ridicule upon me. No, sweet people, let us not at present ask what is the actual nature of the good. For to reach what is now in my thoughts would be an effort too great for me. But the child of the good, who is likest to the good, I would fain speak if I could be sure that you wish to hear, otherwise not.
By all means, he said, tell us about the child, and you shall remain in our debt for the account of the parent. I do indeed wish, I replied, that I could pay and you receive the account of the parent, and not, as now, of the offspring only. Take, however, this latter by way of interest, and at the same time have a care that I do not render a false account, although I have no intention of deceiving you. So basically what he's saying is, I can't tell you what the good is, but I can tell you what it's akin to, what it's like. Yes, we will take all the care that we can. Proceed. Yes, I said, but I must first come to an understanding with you and remind you of what I have mentioned in the course of this discussion and at many other times. What? The old story that there is a many beautiful and a many good, and so of other things which we describe and define. To all of them the term many is applied. True, he said. And there is an absolute beauty and an absolute good, and of other things to which the term many is applied. There is an absolute, for they may be brought under a single idea which is called the essence of each. Exactly. Very true. The many, as we say, are seen but not known, and the ideas are known but not seen. Exactly. And what is the organ which we see visible things? The sight, the eyes, he said. And with hearing, I said, we hear, and with the other senses we perceive other objects of sense. True. But have you remarked that sight is by far the most costly and complex piece of workmanship which the builder of senses ever contrived? No, I never have, he said. Then reflect. Has the ear or voice need of any third or additional nature in order that the one may be able to hear and the other be heard? Nothing of the sort. No, indeed, I replied. And the same is true of most, if not all, the other senses. Would you not say that any of them require such attention or addition? Certainly not. But you see that without the addition of some other nature, there is no seeing or being seen. How do you mean? Sight being, as I conceive, in the eyes, and the person who has eyes wanting to see, color also being present in them, still, unless there be a third nature especially adapted to the purpose, the owner of the eyes will see nothing, and the colors will be invisible. Of what nature are you speaking? Of that which you term light, I replied. True, he said. Noble then is the bond which links together sight and visibility, and great beyond other bonds by no small difference of nature. For light is their bond, and light is no ignoble thing. Nay, he said, the reverse of ignoble. And which, I said, of the gods in heaven would you say was the lord of this element? Who is that light which makes the eye to see perfectly and the visible to appear? You mean the sun, as you and all mankind say. May not the relation of sight to this deity be described as follows? How? Neither sight nor the eye in which sight resides is the sun. No. Yet all of the organs of sense, the eye is the most like the sun, by far the most like, and the power which the eye possesses is a sort of effluence which is dispensed from the sun. Exactly. Then the sun is not sight, but the author of sight, who is recognized by sight. True, he said. And this is he whom I call the child of the good, whom the good begat in his own likeness, to be in the visible world in relation to sight and the things of sight, what the good is in the intellectual world in relation to mind and the things of mind. Will you be a little bit more explicit, he said. Why, you know, I said, that the eyes, when a person directs them towards objects on which the light of day is no longer shining, but the moon and stars only, see dimly and are nearly blind. They seem to have no clearness of vision in them. Very true. But when they are directed towards objects on which the sun shines, they see clearly, and there is sight in them, certainly. And the soul is like the eye, when resting upon that on which truth and being shine, the soul perceives and understands, and is radiant with intelligence. But when turned towards the twilight of becoming and perishing, then she has opinion only, and goes blinking about, and is first of one opinion, and then switches to another, and seems to have no intelligence. Just so. Now, that which imparts truth to the known, and the power of knowing to the knower, is what I would have you term the idea of good. And this you will deem to be the cause of science and truth, insofar as the latter becomes a subject of knowledge. Beautiful, too, as are both truth and knowledge. You will be right in esteeming this other nature as more beautiful than either, and as in the previous instance, light and sight might be truly said to be like the sun, and yet not to be the sun. So, in this other sphere, science and truth may be deemed to be like the good, but not the good. The good has a place of honor yet higher. What a wonder of beauty that must be, he said, which is the author of science and truth, and yet surpasses them in beauty. For you surely cannot mean to say that pleasure is the good. God forbid, I replied. But may I ask you to consider the image in another point of view? In what point of view? You would say, would you not, that the sun is not the only author of visibility in all things, but of generation and nourishment, and we get energy and growth, though he himself is not generation? Certainly. In a like manner, the good may be said to be not only the author of knowledge to all things known, but of their being and essence. And yet the good is not essence, but far exceeds essence in dignity and power. Glaucon said with a ludicrous earnestness, "By the light of heaven, how amazing!" Yes, I said, and the exaggeration may be set down to you, for you made me utter my fancies. So that's the setup then. The sun is to its light, as the good is to divine luminosity, beholding the brilliant light of being. And here we are with the allegory of the cave. And now, I said, let me show in a figure, or an allegory, how far our nature is enlightened or unenlightened. Look, human beings living down in an underground cave, which has a mouth open towards the light of the outside, and reaching all along the cave. Here they have been from their childhood, and have had their legs and necks chained so they cannot turn around to see the opening. They cannot move. They can only see what is right in front of them, being prevented by the chains from turning around their heads. Above and behind them a fire is blazing, and between the fire and the prisoners there is a raised walkway, and you will see, if you look, a low wall built along that way, like the screen which marionette puppet players have in front of them, over which they show puppets. I see, Glaucon said. And do you see, I said, people passing along the wall, carrying all sorts of vessels and statues and figures of animals made of wood and stone and various materials, which appear over the wall, some of them talking and others silent? You have shown me a strange image, and they are strange prisoners. Like ourselves, though, I replied. And they see only the shadows of their own selves, or the shadows of one another, or the shadows that the fire throws on the opposite wall of the cave of the people walking by holding the objects. True, he said. How could they see anything but the shadows if they were never allowed to move their heads? And of the objects which are being carried in a like manner, they would only see the shadows. Yes, he said, and if they were able to converse with one another, would they not suppose that they were naming the actual things, what was actually before them, and not the shadows? Very true. And suppose further that the prison had an echo which came from the other side. Would they not be sure to think, when one of the passers-by spoke, that the voice which they had heard came from the shadow itself and not the actual person who was uttering the words? No question, he replied. To them, I said, the truth would literally be nothing but the shadows of the real images. That is certain. And now look again and see what will naturally follow if the prisoners are released and disabused of their error, their ignorance. At first, when one of them is freed and compelled suddenly to stand up and turn his neck around and walk and look towards the light of the fire, they will suffer sharp pains. The glare will distress them, and they will be unable to see the realities of which in the former state they had seen the shadows, and then convince someone saying to them that what they had seen before was an illusion. But now, when that person is approaching nearer to being and the eye is turned towards more real existence, they have a clearer vision. What will be that person's reply, the former prisoner? What would they say? And you may further imagine that the instructor is pointing to the objects as they pass in front of the fire and requiring the new student to name them. Would that person not be perplexed? Would they not fancy that the shadows which they formerly saw are truer than the objects which are now shown? Far truer. And if that person is compelled to look straight at the light, would they not have a pain in their eyes, which would make them turn away and take refuge in the objects of vision which he can see, and which that person would conceive to be in reality clearer than the things which are now being shown? True, he said. And suppose once more that that person is reluctantly dragged up a steep and rugged hill and held fast until that person is forced into the presence of the sun itself outside the cave. Is that person not likely to be pained and irritated in the bright sunlight? When they approach the light, the eyes will be dazzled, and they will not be able to see anything at first of what is now called realities. Not at all in a moment, he said. That person would require to grow accustomed to the bright sight of the upper world, and first they will see the shadows best. Next, the reflections of people and other objects in the water, and then the objects themselves. Then that person will gaze upon the light of the moon and the stars and the heavens, and will see the sky and the stars by night better than the sun or the light by day. Certainly. Last of all, that person will be able to see the sun, and not mere reflections of the sun in the water, but will see the sun in its proper place, and not in another, and will contemplate the sun as it is, certainly. He will then proceed to argue that this is what gives the seasons and the years and is the guardian of all that is in the visible world. Everything gets its light and energy from the sun. Even the fire down below gets its energy from the sun through the wood. And in a certain way, the cause of all things which he and his fellows had been accustomed to behold, clearly, Glaucon said, that person would first see the sun and then realize about him. And when the person remembered his old habitation and the wisdom of the cave and the fellow prisoners, do you not suppose that that person would felicitate himself on the change and pity them? So be happy that they now see the truth? Certainly that person would. And if that person were in the habit of conferring honors among themselves on those who were quickest down in the cave to observe the passing shadows, and to remark which of them went before and which followed after, and which went together, and who were the best able to draw conclusions as to the future of the shadows, do you think that that person would care for such honors and glories, or envy to be the possessor of them now? Would that person not say with Homer, better to be the poor servant of a poor master, and to endure anything rather than to think that they do in the cave and live in their cave manner? Yes, he said, I think that that person would rather suffer anything than entertain these false notions down in the shadows and live in the miserable manner. Imagine once more, I said, such a one coming suddenly out of the sun to be replaced in their old situation. Would they not certainly to have eyes full of darkness, because they weren't adjusted yet? To be sure, Glaucon said. And if there were a contest, and that person had to compete in measuring the shadows with the other prisoners who had never moved out of the den, while that person's sight was still weak from the really bright light of the sun, and before their eyes had become steady, and the time which would be needed to acquire this new habit of sight might be very considerable, would that person not appear to be ridiculous? The other prisoners would say of that person that he went up and down, and he came down without any eyes, and that it was better not to even think of going up there where the other person went. And if anyone tried to loose another and lead him up into the light, let them only catch the offender, and they would put him to death. This entire allegory, I said, you may now append, dear Glaucon, to the previous argument. The prisoner house is the world of sight. The light of the fire is the sun. And you will not misapprehend me if you interpret the journey upwards to be the ascent of the soul into the intellectual world according to my poor belief, which at your desire I have expressed, whether rightly or wrongly, God knows. But whether true or false, my opinion is that in the world of knowledge, the idea of the good appears last of all, and is only seen with an effort. And when seen, it is also inferred to be the universal author of all things, beautiful and right, parent of light and of the Lord of light in this visible world, and the immediate source of reason and truth in the intellectual, and that this is the power upon which the person who would act rationally, either in public or in private life, must have their eye fixed upon. I agree, Glaucon said, as far as I am able to understand you. Moreover, I said, you must not wonder that those who attain to this terrific, beatific vision are unwilling to descend to human affairs, for their souls are ever hastening into the upper world, where they desire to dwell, which desire of theirs is very natural, if our allegory may be trusted. Yes, very natural. And is there anything surprising in one who passes from divine contemplations to the evil state of mankind, misbehaving himself in a ridiculous manner, if, while their eyes are blinking and before they have become accustomed to the surrounding darkness, that person is compelled to fight in a law court or in other places about the images or the shadows, images of justice, and is endeavoring to meet the conceptions of those who have never seen absolute justice, anything but surprising. Anyone who has common sense will remember that the bewilderment of the eyes are of two kinds and arise from two causes, either from coming out of the light or from going back into the light, which is true of the mind's eye quite as much as of the bodily eye. And the person who remembers this when you see anyone whose vision is perplexed and weak will not be too ready to laugh. They will first ask whether that soul of the person has come out of the brighter light and is unable to see because unaccustomed to the dark, or having turned from darkness to the day is dazzled by excess of light. And that person will count the one in the happy condition and state of being and will pity the other. Or if they have a mind to laugh at the soul which comes from below into the light, there will be more reason in this than in the laugh which greets him who returns from above out of the light into the cave. That, he said, is a very just distinction. But then, if I am right, certain professors of education must be wrong when they say that they can put a knowledge into the soul which was not there before, like sight into blind eyes. Undoubtedly they say this, he replied, whereas our argument shows that the power and capacity of learning exists in the soul already, and that just as the eye was unable to turn from darkness to light without the whole body, so too the instrument of knowledge can only be by the movement of the whole soul turned from the world of becoming into that of being, and learn by degrees to endure the sight of being and the brightest and best of being, or in other words, of the good. So we'll stop there, but it goes on just as part of the book. So the allegory of the cave is the integral part of the book, and it's hard to kind of pick where it stops and where it starts, where it ends. So the sun is to its light as the good is to divine luminosity, beholding the brilliant light of being. Okay, so he describes what is a knowledge and education towards learning what the good is, beholding the brilliant light of being, truth, knowledge, beauty. And then circling back, Socrates says, then the business of us who are the founders of this city-state will be to compel the best minds to attain that knowledge which we have already shown to be the greatest of all. They must continue to ascend in their study, in their quest, until they arrive at the good. That's the ultimate supreme principle, the good. But when they have ascended and seen enough, we must not allow them to do as they do now. What do you mean? Asked Glaucon. I mean that they remain in the upper world. But this must not be allowed. They must be made to descend again among the prisoners in the cave and partake of their labors and honors, whether they are worth having or not. But is not this unjust? Said Glaucon. Ought we to give them a worse life when they might have a better? You have again forgotten, my friend, I said, the intention of the legislator, who did not aim at making any one class in the state happy above the rest. The happiness was to be in the whole state, and that person held the citizens together by persuasion and necessity, making them benefactors of the state, and therefore benefactors of one another. To this end, the legislator created them, not to please themselves, but to be the instruments of the binding up in the state. True, I had forgotten. Observe, Glaucon, that there will be no injustice in compelling our philosophers, or you call them yogis, to have a care and a providence of others. We shall explain to them that in other states, people of their class are not obliged to share in the toils of politics. And this is reasonable, for they grow up at their own sweet will, and the government would rather not have them. Being self-taught, they cannot be expected to show any gratitude for a culture which they have never received. But we have brought you into the world to be rulers of the hive, kings of yourselves and of the other citizens, and have educated you far better and more perfectly than they have been educated, and you are better able to share in the double duty. Wherefore, each of you, when their turn comes, must go down into the underground abode, the cave, and get the habit of seeing in the dark. When you have acquired the habit, you will see 10,000 times better than the inhabitants of the cave, and you will know what the several images are and what they represent, the shadows. You won't be deceived as them as reality. You know the shadows to be shadows of what they represent, because you have seen the beautiful and the just and the good in their truth. And thus our state, which is also yours, will be a reality and not a dream only, and will be administered in a spirit unlike that of other states, in which men fight with one another about shadows only, and are distracted in the struggle for power and greed and wealth and things, which in their eyes is the greatest good. Whereas the truth is that the state in which the rulers are most reluctant to govern is always the best and the most quietly governed, and the state in which they are most eager, the worst. So think about America today. How much money, how much effort people spend to get politicians elected, and the politicians really want to be politicians. The state in which the politicians are the most eager to be politicians is the worst governed. Quite true, he replied. And will our pupils, when they hear this, refuse to take their turn at the toils of government, leadership, when they are allowed to spend the greater part of their time with one another in the heavenly light? Impossible, he answered, for they are just people, and the commands which we impose upon them are just, and there can be no doubt that every one of them will take office as a stern necessity, and not after the fashion of our present rulers of state, which is to have power for the sake of power and greed, wealth. Yes, my friend, I said, and there lies the point. You must contrive for your future rulers another and a better life, and then you may have a well-ordered state. For only in this state which offers this will they rule who are truly rich, not in silver and gold, but in virtue and wisdom, which are the true blessings of life. Whereas, if they go to the administration of public affairs, poor and hungering after their own private advantage, greedy, thinking that Now they are able to snatch the chief good, which is power and money. Order can never be, for they will be fighting about the office and who can rule. They will fight themselves. And the civil and domestic broils which thus arise will be the ruin of rulers themselves and of the whole state. It's exactly what's going on in the United States right now. The leaders are fighting and doing unjust things to stay in power and to get in power, and all the money that it takes to get in power, because they equate power and money to be the greatest good, because they are not educated what the greatest good actually is. And now shall we consider in what ways such people, such guardians, the spirited part of the soul, will be produced, and how they are to be brought from darkness into the light, as some are said to have ascended from the world below to the gods. By all means, he replied. The process, I said, is not of the turning over of an oyster shell. It's a reference to an ancient Greek game in which the players divided into two sides and chased their opponents, or ran away according to an oyster shell tossed in the air, fell with one side up or the other side down. So it's like chances. The process is not by chance, but the turning around of the soul from a day which is a little better than night to the true day of being. That is the ascent from below, which we affirm to be true philosophy. And remember what we learned about what true philosophy was and the definition of true philosophy from the Phaedo. True philosophy, he says, true philosophers are able to separate their soul from the body, gather the soul, which is the psyche, the living part that's within all of us, the self, gather it up and separate the soul from the body, and to be able to see the true light of being. That's meditation. So the parallels between the cave allegory and ancient Indian philosophy, especially the Vedanta philosophy, are really striking. Some of the language is even similar. The illusion that we all see when we're perceiving the world and the universe with our senses is an illusion, and that's called Maya. It veils the true reality and projects a false reality. And the way to cut through that is to stop the senses, shut down the senses, shut down the mind, and then the knowing faculty of the self, the knowing faculty in the mind, the knowing faculty in the soul, is able to see what Socrates calls the brilliant light of being, the real reality, the real truth, the good. Because the Republic is so long and there's so much content in it, I think it's important to remind ourselves where Socrates started. And basically the question is, what is justice in the world? Is might makes right the right doctrine? I mean, could you go around doing whatever you want and grabbing whatever you want and following only the laws that you made because you have all the power and all the money? Or is justice something else? Is justice tied to a more deeper and more fundamental reality than just whatever the strongest among us or the wealthiest among us want or can do? So then a lot of people think, okay, well, they forget that Plato is not describing a state that he wants to build and create and see on the earth. He's creating a model, whereas we can more broadly understand what is justice and what is injustice in this context, and why is justice better than a might makes right nihilist type philosophy. And I think a lot of people kind of forget that point, and they think that Plato has authoritarian or fascist tendencies, which I think is a really good point, and you can argue that.
And it's really interesting to discuss. I'm not completely dismissing that as an idea, because I'm a little confused myself in how to reconcile some of the things. Like, for example, he thinks that one of the things he says in the state, that the state should tamp down on poetry and music, and they should kind of censor basically what the poets and musicians are doing, because they need to make sure that the education is the best, just on truth for the young. And I think that's an interesting question to wrestle with, but it's not the subject that we're going to go down the rabbit hole now. But another idea that people point to the authoritarianism is he's talking about the guardians, and how the guardians come about in this model this model state that he's making. It's a very strange thing. The men and women guardians are kind of all held in common. There's no family units. There's no family, and the men and women are brought together by the leaders under a pretext. They're basically lying and saying that it's just random, but behind the scenes it's not really random. They're choosing the men and the women who come together, who can produce the offspring of these guardians in his city-state that he's making the model of. And again, I don't think it's something that he's actually advocating to do in real life. I think, number one, he would probably just patently say that this is ridiculous. There's no way you could actually really do this. And so I think if you go back to kind of the point, and he made his perfectly just small state that wasn't greedy or luxurious. It didn't have any of that. So he only gets into this weirdness of kind of telling the noble lie, or kind of genetically kind of breeding the guardians. It's only in the luxurious, greedy state. So I think that has something to do with obviously as the model to the soul. So like the state is the model for the human psyche, the human mind here, the human soul, as they would call it in ancient Greece. So as to the extent that you're lying to the guardians in the model, you got to find a parallel in the human soul. So where is the human soul lying to itself in order to be greedy, in order to have luxury, have the third yacht and the second vacation home, and all the greed and the lust for pleasure that we have in modern society, and the emptiness of pursuing material things? What are we lying to ourselves? Where's the lie that the guardians in ourselves are? Where's the parallel? Though I still haven't found the answer. But I think one of the interesting, and people call it irony too in Plato, talking about like having a noble lie. He says one of the things in book 2 is he says, no one is willingly deceived in that which is the truest and highest part of himself, or about the truest and highest matters there above all. A person is most afraid of having a lie being in possession of him. And the reason is deception, or being deceived or uninformed about highest realities and the highest part of themselves, which is the soul, and in that part of them to have and to hold the lie, is what mankind least like. I say it is what they utterly detest. So, one part of and then he goes on to say that sometimes a lie is useful in some cases, and not bad when you're dealing with your enemies that would harm you. That would be an instance, he says, or when those who we call our friends have a fit of madness or illusion, so we tell a lie to prevent some harm, and then a lie can be useful in some sort of a medicine or preventative. Also in mythology, when we don't really know about, they didn't have archaeology like we do today, but we still have myths about the past. So he says a lot of the times we come up with stories about the past, and that's kind of like a lie, because we don't know the actual truth. But those are the only examples he uses when it's okay to tell a lie. So this whole business about lying about where these guardians come from, their parents, that's one of the the highest
the path to find your highest self is, where do you come from? Your parents. So I think I really have struggled with the notion that Plato is being serious here, and he really wants to build a state like this. I think it really is just a model for examining justice, and in this case, injustice, because that's what he says when he starts making the model, is he wants to examine justice and injustice. So obviously, there's a lot of things that he'll talk about that do seem fascist or authoritarianism, and I think you can rightly call it injustice, because he's examining justice and injustice, not only in the state, but also especially, because remember, the state that he's making is just a model for the individual, for the psyche, for the soul. Okay, we're going to get into some concluding remarks by reading some of book 9 and 10, and to get the final gist of some concluding remarks that Plato was hoping to impart on his readers. Here's the end of book 9. And therefore, being desirous of placing the self under a rule like that of the best, we say that a person ought to be the servant of the best, in whom the divine rules, not, as Thrasymachus supposed, to the injury of the servant, but because everyone had better be ruled by divine wisdom dwelling within that person, or, if this be impossible, then by an external authority, in order that we may all be, as far as possible, under the same government, friends and equals. So he's saying that, not as Thrasymachus says, you don't rule for your own greed and power, and might makes right. You rule to serve and help the people, and by doing so, you're not injuring yourself as a ruler, you're actually benefiting yourself the most as a ruler. Glaucon says, true. And this is clearly seen to be the intention of the law, which is the ally of the whole city, and is seen also in the authority which we exercise over children, and the refusal to let them be free until we have established in them a principle analogous to the constitution of a state. And by cultivation of this higher element, we have set up in their hearts a guardian and a ruler like our own in our model that we just talked about. And when this is done, the children may grow up and go on their way. Yes, he said, the purpose of the law is manifest. From what point of view, then, and on what ground, can we say that a person is benefited more by injustice or intemperance or other baseness, which will make that person a worse human, even though they acquire money or power by their wickedness, from no point of view at all? What shall that person profit if their injustice be undetected and unpunished? He who is undetected only gets worse, whereas the person who is detected and punished has the brutal part of their nature silenced and humanized. The gentler element in them is liberated, and the whole soul is perfected and ennobled by the acquirement of justice and temperance and wisdom, more than the body ever is by receiving gifts of beauty, strength, health, pleasure, money, etc., in proportion as the soul is more honorable than the body. Certainly, he said. To this nobler purpose, the person of understanding will devote the entire energies of their life. And, in the first place, that person will honor studies which impress these qualities on the soul. And the person will disregard others? Clearly. And in the acquisition of wealth, there is a principle of order and harmony which that person will also observe. They will not allow themselves to be dazzled by the foolish applause of the world and heap upon riches to their infinite harm. Certainly not. A wise person will look at the city which is within themselves and take heed that no disorder occurs in it, such as might arise either from superfluity or from want, and upon this principle they will regulate the property and gain or spending according to their means. Very true. And for the same reason, a person will gladly accept and enjoy such honors as they deem likely to make them a better human. But those, whether private or public, which are likely to disorder their life, that person will avoid. Then, if that is the motive, they will not be a statesman, like a politician. They will not be a politician. By the dog of Egypt, that person will be a politician in the city which is their own, inside. They certainly will, though in the land of their birth, perhaps not, unless they have a divine call. So there is the philosopher king, the philosopher ruler right there. It's not a ruler of an actual city-state. It's not a politician. It's a ruler of the self. I understand. You mean that that person will be a ruler in the city of which we are founders, and which exists only in idea. For I do not believe that there is such a city anywhere on earth. So there's the key right there. They're only making a model of a city that's the model for a person. And there's no cities, there's no countries like this anywhere in actuality, in the real world. In heaven, I replied, there is laid up a pattern of it, methinks, which a person who desires may behold and understand, and in understanding may set up their own house in order, their own soul. But whether such a real country exists, or ever will exist in fact, is no matter. For that person will live after the manner of that city, having nothing to do with any other real city. I think so, said Glaucon. So there it is right there. They're just talking about a model for the human self, the human psychology, the human soul, not a real city. And they don't seek to make that into a real city. It's just a model to contemplate. All right, here's the end of Book 10. And here, my dear Glaucon, is the supreme peril of our human state, and therefore the utmost care should be taken. Let each of us leave every other kind of knowledge, and seek and follow one thing only. If, perhaps, a person may be able to learn and may find someone who will make that person able to learn and discern between good and evil, and so to always choose everywhere the better life as that person has opportunity. A person should consider the bearing of all these things which have been mentioned, severally and collectively, upon virtue, and that person should know what the effect of beauty is when combined with poverty or wealth in a particular soul, and what are the good and evil consequences of noble and humble birth, of private and public station, of strength and weakness, of cleverness and dullness, and of all the natural and acquired gifts of the soul, and the operation of them when conjoined. The person will then look at the nature of the soul, and from the consideration of all these qualities, the person will be able to determine which is the better and which is the worse. And so they will choose, giving the name of evil to the life which will make the soul more unjust, and good to the life which will make the soul more just. All else they will disregard, for we have seen and know that this is the best choice both in life and after death. A person must take with them into the world below an unbreakable faith in truth and right, that there too they may be undazzled by the desire of wealth or the allurements of evil pleasure, lest, coming upon tyrannies and similar villainies, the person do irredeemable wrongs to others, and suffer yet worse for themselves. But let that person know how to choose the mean and avoid the extremes on either side, as far as possible, not only in this life, but in all that is to come. For this is the way of happiness, fulfillment, flourishing, eudaimonia. Here's the last paragraph of the book. Wherefore my counsel is that we hold fast ever to the heavenly way, and follow after justice and virtue always, considering that the soul is immortal, and able to endure every sort of good and every sort of evil. Thus shall we live dear to one another and to the gods, both while remaining here and when, like conquerors in the games who go around to gather their gifts, we receive our reward. And it shall be well with us both in this life and in the pilgrimage of 1,000 years, which we have been describing.